If that works, there we are. Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be back in Queensland. And as a Queenslander, Queensland will always be home. You never get over it. Although I have learnt to speak quickly, and anyway, we won't go there. Look, my first slide was going to be what we do in my office. We're going to go straight past that and talk about that a little bit later. Now, when I looked at the topic I was supposed to speak about today, compliance and governance, I went to sleep listening, sort of reading the topic. But, it's not a boring topic, because none of us can run our businesses unless we care about this stuff. And let's have a bit of a look for a moment about what business really looks like in Australia. You'll get a lot of numbers, particularly from governments, about how many businesses exist in Australia, but there's about 2.3 million businesses that are actually trading. There's lots of, you can go up to 3 million, you can go to all sorts of other figures if you add family trusts and all sorts of things, but there's 2.3 million trading businesses in Australia, and if you just have a look at them, 62% of them, or 1.4 million, are people who don't employ anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have people working with them, because increasingly businesses are using contractors, a range of other methods that aren't actually employees. But for all of that, 62%, 1.4 million are sole traders. 27%, 1 to 4 employees. So under 5 employees are actually 75% of businesses that are not sole traders. So the vast percentage of businesses in Australia are either sole traders or have less than 5 employees. 5 to 19 is 8.5%. That's pretty close to 200,000 businesses. But now we get to significantly fewer numbers, and that's 20 to 200 employees, 199 employees, is only 50,000 businesses in Australia, and over that, 3,800 businesses, or 0.2%. So why I'm putting that in context is we have to understand what business looks like in this country. Predominantly, it's in the small space, or at most small to medium space. That's why governments and others continue to talk about the engine room of the economy, because if you think about it, if only half of those sole traders employed one person, we wouldn't have any unemployment in this country. Right at the moment, we have 700,000 people who are looking for a job. So one person from half of the people who don't employ anybody at this stage, we have no unemployment. So it shows you why it's really important to get the system right, the ecosystem you could say, but particularly the regulatory system right, to make it easier for small businesses to employ that one more person to really get the economy moving. And of course, to employ one more person requires a whole range of things. Now, let's just have a bit of a look at this. Let's have a look at the regulatory maze. The Fair Work Act is the act that oversights the way you can employ people in this country. Many of you will know it very well, those in HR and whatever. It's over 1,000 pages, 250,000 words, 960 sections, and that's before we even get close to the 124 modern awards. These are the simplified ones, really, but not really. So that's the system that we're dealing with. And in the modern awards, they're complex in their own right for those that deal with them. They're long, they're convoluted, and they're difficult to comply with. For many small businesses, they'll be employing people under a number of different awards. There's the dilemma we've got at the moment with a particular company that's in the restauranting business, but they do their own deliveries. And they were paying, the person who was doing their deliveries was actually working front of house and was employed under that award, not under the courier award. Ended up with a problem with the Fair Work Ombudsman on this, and there is some significant differences between those awards and how much they might owe to a particular person. You know, you never know when you're going to have a falling out with an employee, and an employee go to the Fair Work Commission and unfair contract. Anyway, we won't even go there at the moment. So to have, you know, a good knowledge of what this looks like is really important. Then we could go to what work health and safety looks like. That's, you know, 253 pages. The Competition and Consumer Act, that's 430 pages. The Privacy Act. We could go on and on. And I haven't even spoken about tax. Tax is actually 16,000 pages if you want to go to all of the parts of the Tax Act, and they of course have different areas for income tax, excise duties, customs rules, GST, fringe benefit tax. You know, you could go on and on in this space. And then of course we have levels of government, just to make it more exciting. Then there's state governments with payroll taxes and land taxes and stamp duties and all sorts of things. Now, the reason I'm putting all this in context is small businesses, the vast percentage of the ones we're talking about, under 5 employees, 99% of them turning over under $10 million. There's nothing to say you don't have to comply with this. In fact, you do. Whether you're BHP or one of these, you know, small engine room of the economy businesses, the law is the same for all of you, for all of them. So, just let's have a bit of a look. Oh, that's just more of the... So you can sort of understand why sometimes people don't employ people, don't you? Because they get a bit worried about, if I employ somebody, what does that actually mean? You know, how am I going to comply with all of these difficult things? Here we go. Let's have a look at having a look at some case studies. And I wanted to talk a little bit about things like R&D grants, which many of you might be involved with. In December last year, Airtasker was asked to pay back a huge sum of money in the R&D space. My office is currently dealing with a whole range of cases in this space because the ATO has decided to do a range of audits on R&D grants or R&D tax return, we'll call them R&D grants. Some people would say they're not grants, but for all of that. So the R&D incentives are being audited by the ATO. The problem for Airtasker was that a chunk of their R&D incentive went to software development, and it was software that they were using in their business. The ATO determined that that did not comply with the requirements of the R&D incentive, even though I would argue that Airtasker used that money for the purpose that they had indicated they were going to use it for. Airtasker used a Tier 1 accounting firm to prepare their R&D incentive tax return, but still, according to the ATO, got it wrong. We've got a chunk of these cases at the moment, people who have claimed and got R&D tax incentives. One particular startup company, it's a platform-based company, got $300,000 each year for 3 years, have just been asked to pay back $1 million. Now, the great dilemma there is they don't actually have $1 million because they spent it on R&D, but just not acceptable R&D. So the reason I'm bringing these things up is that these things matter. They can be fundamental to business going forward if you get them wrong. So the importance of focusing on what the ATO is saying at the moment about R&D incentives, what they're looking for, what they're not looking for, and if you have a problem, come to an office like mine and we'll help you. Now, whether we always succeed, but we often do. One of the things that is happening right now is single touch payroll. How many of you know what that is? good, this is good, taking into account that it's the law. It's very important that you know what it is. As you'd be aware, single-touch payroll became mandatory for all businesses from the 1st of July this year. That is a business that employs one person. It's true that for businesses under 5 or up to 4 employees, that they can continue to use a BAS agent or their accountant potentially until 30th of June 2021. So for another couple of years, your accountant or your BAS agent can put in your single-touch payroll return. But after that, no. And if you have more than 4 employees, not now. So you've got to be able to comply. What does that mean? It means that you've got to have an electronic payroll system. You've got to have a system that is single-touch payroll compliant. Xero is. Software packages like Xero, MyOb, really easy to push the button, it works. But there's an awful lot of businesses that don't have those, and I'm sure that the sort of platform we heard about before, would help with that sort of approach. But it's the law, and it's the law right now. There was a survey done, as you can see up there, not so long ago, in April, that suggested about 70% of small businesses had really no idea that they had to be compliant and didn't really know what single-touch payroll was. Fundamentally, it just means when you do a payroll run, you have to send the information straight to the ATO of what you've withheld in terms of PAYG, tax and super. You don't have to pay it earlier than you do at the moment, but you have to tell the ATO that you've done it, for who and how much. It fundamentally means the ATO is going to be able to track you to make sure that you did pay your super, the super for your employees, and they'll have a sense of, well, they will know how much tax is coming in. It's a huge new impost on small businesses, by the way. In the end, it will cut... In the end, it will cut compliance costs once you get up and running. It means that you don't have to, there is certain reductions. You don't have to send people your annual statement of income any longer. That was a group certificate for those who've been around for a long time. That won't need to happen because this system will achieve that. So the regulatory environment for small businesses or for small to medium businesses is quite significant. I could go on for a very, very long time, but a survey not so long ago suggested that small businesses were losing $20 billion a year to the red tape administrative burden. $15,000 per business. The Chambers of Commerce does an annual survey of red tape. The view is it's about 11 hours a week. So the sorts of apps you were hearing about before, some of the stuff that Reckon does as another sponsor, and many other companies, is fundamental here. Having those apps that will help you reduce this regulatory burden is going to be in my view, the only way that you can increase your productivity. And without that, I think we'll all be doomed, shall we say? And productivity really hasn't increased all that much in Australia for well over the last number of years, and we've certainly got to do something about that. You can have copies of these slides later, so I won't go through all of the dot points. But the reality here is this is a complex system. If you don't embrace the things that'll improve your productivity, then it will affect your bottom line and it'll affect your capacity to continue. It'll also affect your capacity to comply with the significant requirements, and you could end up like the business I was talking to you about that has $1 million bill from the ATO for their R&D incentive, which they can't pay. So you could end up in a scenario like another one of our companies, who's a platform-based company, 4 years in, been through 2 initial capital raises, ready for its major capital raise. The company's going well, The ATO does an audit and determines that the people who are working on the platform are employees, not contractors. The ATO then determines that means that super is owed for plus other issues for all of that work that has been done over the last 4 years. The capital raise is put on hold because obviously you can't go to a capital raise when that sort of issue is happening. That happened 2 years ago. The audit, the toing and froing with the ATO has taken 2 years so far. Hopefully there's an agreement, but it's not an agreement without cost, a significant cost. Those are the sorts of things that are happening. Okay, so what's the answer? The answer is being on top of what your compliance requirements are. And there's a lot of really good information out there. Obviously, great information from companies that you've got here today. But the Fair Work Ombudsman website, we spend a lot of time bashing these guys up to have small business friendly information. The Small Business Showcase has good information about, what pay slips need to look like. You can end up with a non-compliance problem with the Fair Work Ombudsman because your pay slips aren't appropriate, don't have particular bits on them that they need to have. It's really easy to underpay staff, even when you're meaning to pay them properly, unless you do the hard yards. It can be really a little bit. The ABC, heavens, earlier this year, found with an internal audit process that they'd underpaid 2,500 casual employees, underpaid them for 5 years. This is a huge amount of money. Per person, not a huge amount, but we're talking about multi-millions of dollars. Now, except that's at the big end, but you don't have to underpay by much to end up with a very big problem. Can I suggest you have a look at the Small Business Showcase? It's also got some great online learning scenarios about hiring employees, about performance, about difficult conversations, like how you get rid of someone, those things. Because the great reason why lots of people don't put people on is because they're really scared that they couldn't put people off if they didn't work out or if the business didn't track as well as they believe it should. Even the ATO, and I say even the ATO, under its current leadership is trying really hard to be a bit more SME friendly than it has been in the past. And I have to say there's Small Business Newsroom, which if you haven't signed up to, you should. It's a monthly newsletter and it tells you all sorts of good stuff. And they've got a lot of other information in that space about how you comply, really. And if you've got issues, say, with R&D incentives and so on, they won't tell you what to do, which we're working on, or they give you advice on what to do, but they will tell you where they're focusing and what to be worried about, not how to fix it, unfortunately. ACCC, their Scam Watch scenario is really good because you can see what's happening out there. And, the dilemma in the SME space is we are the new target for scams. Used to be consumers, still older Australians, unfortunately, but small business are being seen as the easy mark, and the amount of money that small businesses are losing in this space is escalating quickly. We had a childcare centre recently that was subject to ransomware, so all of their data locked up, so they didn't know so they had to close the centre because they didn't know what their kids were allergic to. And what the requirements were for those individual children because it was in the data. And they didn't have a proper backup and guess what? They paid. But they paid because their IT people said it would take a week to fix it and so on. I think that's scary. But it shows that, even businesses that you wouldn't have ever thought were subject to this sort of thing can be. So looking at your IT security is really important. And remember now there's a chunk of legislation in this space about, particularly in the healthcare space, having to report scenarios where your IT system has been infringed. So again, a chunk of legislation you need to know about in certain areas. There are lots of assistance programs around, and biz.gov.au is a really good place to go. But remember to read the fine print, as I said, in terms of R&D. Biz.gov.au is supposed to be the single portal, shall we say, to government services. It has a lot of really good information on it, there is no doubt. But like most government sites, unfortunately, they tend to be information heavy and one might say information that is useful, not so useful. So, but it's worthwhile going and having a look. If you look at grants and assistance, you'll see, what needs to happen. There's some good stuff on cybersecurity, all those sorts of issues. But now I'm just going to go right back to the beginning because I want to tell you about what we do. There we are. So what does my office do in this space? We are a really weird entity. I'm a statutory officer. That means the Governor-General appoints me and I don't report to the government of the day. So I have a piece of legislation, and what my legislation tells me I have to do is advocate on behalf of small to medium businesses. That's defined as under 100 employees. That's 99% of businesses in Australia. That means we can do research inquiries, submissions, all sorts of things. We've done inquiries into the banks, got the banks to change their loan contracts for small to medium businesses, which was a bit of a coup. We are doing some work on access to justice. We've done a lot of work with the fintech lending industry, because a lot of small businesses are getting their finance there because the banks aren't lending. Remember, fintechs are not banks. Remember, fintechs in Australia are not regulated on the whole. That doesn't mean they're bad. We work closely with them. The big seven fintechs have, of recent days, put in place a voluntary code and have agreed to a complaints mechanism to join something called AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. But the area generally, in terms of lending to business, not lending to consumers, is not regulated. They are not. There are no legislative requirements. So just always remember that there's not the same protection as there would be in the more traditional financial area, and how they work out interest rates and a whole range of things is not the way you traditionally would have known that to be done. They are incredibly important in the current scenario, and they are picking up more and more of the business. But on our website, we have a paper on what you need to know about fintech lending if you're planning to borrow from a fintech. We also do one-on-one assistance. So if you guys have got a problem with a big company that's not paying you on time, with an unfair contract term, doing a lot of work in the franchising space with franchising agreements, with unfair contract terms in franchising agreements and in other areas. So we are there to help you grow your business and overcome some of the unfair issues that can sometimes happen with imbalance of power. No, we absolutely believe that business should be able to get on with it. We're not in the business of protecting, people against themselves, shall we say. We believe that there should be good competition, but in Australia we have a level of very big entities, whether they be government or in the private sector, that can sometimes use their power inappropriately. Can I just finish with just one comment? And it's a statement by Colin Powell in one of his leadership events, and he said that leadership is the art of achieving more than the science of management says is possible. And I think that is absolutely true. And what you guys are here today to do is that. I mean, we can all read what you're supposed to do from a management perspective, but leadership, taking that next step, getting the most out of your people, addressing some of the stuff, the boring stuff, but the stuff that if you get wrong can kill your business, is that step past that. It's taking leadership, delivering more for your staff and for your business than the science of management says is possible. Thank you very much.